What does your family mean to you? Are they just people you surround yourself with for your convenience? Do you love them, or do you just like them? What I'm trying to say is, are you the kind of person who has a dream first and foremost for yourself and others just fill in the blanks? Does your work come first and your family is more of a hobby? I have asked too many questions that a person needs to answer. Some of you will really have to think about it before you give your true opinion. Others will answer it immediately, but they will know they are lying to themselves. And then there will be people like me who will not hesitate to tell you that my family comes first. My children and grandchildren are above everything else in my life. They are the sole reason for my existence. They are the sun, moon, and stars to me. I would literally give them my last shirt. Without even asking for their consent to do so, I would give my last dollar to any of them for their frivolous whim. I would gladly make do with only the bare essentials for any of them to enjoy luxury. You may have noticed that my wife is not included in my statement above. Once upon a time, 20 years ago, I had a wife. No. She's not dead, at least not in the physical sense. We weren't even divorced. That would have upset my children. We continue to coexist in the same house, under the same conditions we have for over 40 years. The children know nothing of the rift that has occurred between my wife and I, and more importantly, she knows nothing either. You may think I'm being ridiculous. I continue to love my family with the exception of my wife and pretend that all is well. Why would a sane person do such a thing? My 3 children all love their mother, and to tell them something that is indelibly imprinted on my mind would mean belittling her in their eyes. I simply love them too much to affect their happiness in any way, even to my own detriment. You wanna call me weak? Well, you can kiss my ass. Call me a coward. That's bullshit. What I've done for the last 20 years is protect my children. It's been a harder feat than you can imagine. Much harder than any form of torture ever invented by man. My name is Charlie. And I have 3 children, 2 boys, and a girl. They are everything to me. The oldest Rob is about to turn 40, Billy is 37, and my baby girl Judy just turned 33. Thanks to them, I have 8 beautiful, wonderful grandchildren, and I would gladly give my life for any of them. I have kept this secret inside of me for almost 20 years. The woman who was once my life and my only love is Sally. I tell you this now because I only have a few days or hours left. The doctor tells me it won't hurt. Sally and I once had what you would call the perfect marriage. We met right out of college. I had a great job as an aspiring architect. Sally was in real estate, and she loved what she did. I first saw her at a restaurant. For me, it was love at first sight. Looking back, I realized it took her a little longer to tell me she loved me. I asked her out to a movie. That's how it was done back then. We dated for a few months, and I finally had the courage to ask her to marry me. We were married 6 months later in a church her family went to. Hawaii was where we spent our honeymoon and learned about the physical side of loving each other. We spent a gorgeous week in the sun and spent hours exploring each other's bodies. Our life as newlyweds was happy. We worked to save money for a house and we loved each other. Sally was very good at her job and found us a beautiful house that we couldn't afford. We bought it with difficulty. Vowing to work harder and cut back on things we didn't need, we no longer ate out of the house and took our lunches to work. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, and it quickly paid off. I was soon promoted, and now we could easily afford the house. When we first bought the house, we started spending time together doing things we didn't have to spend money on, like taking long walks and having picnics. We enjoyed that time so much that we continued to be frugal and spent time together even afterward, enjoying each other. The money we made was spent on the house. We worked like dogs to make it beautiful where we could raise our family and grow old together. The day Sally told me she was expecting our first child, I couldn't have been happier or more proud. All of my prayers had been answered. Sally's belly grew each day and so did my love for her. We continued to live the way we lived, choosing to spend our time rather than our money on our children and ourselves. Don't get me wrong. We had everything we needed. We just felt it was more important to do things together as a family than for the kids to have all the latest toys. By doing almost everything as a team, we tried to instill family values in our kids, teaching them to distinguish right from wrong in their own way with love. Church was a big part of our lives, not because we were fanatics, but we wanted our children to believe in a higher power. Attending services every Sunday as a family and participating in all the outings and picnics, our life was a happy one. At the age of 43, I was injured on a construction site while inspecting a building we were building. I was struck by a falling piece of metal beam and my back turned into a mess. The doctors put me back together from the pieces, and I spent over 3 months in the hospital, praying every day that I would be able to recover and provide for my family. It took me a long time to learn to walk and get around on my own. The pain was horrible, so I took a lot of painkillers. The pain either subsided or I just started to get used to it. It took a while to wean myself off the drugs, but eventually I got my life under control. I used a mild form of my relaxant for relief. I was able to function normally most of the time, so I went back to work. My family life was pretty normal then considering my physical limitations. The only problem was that the medication made me impotent. Sex with my wife was always, and I really mean always, wonderful and frequent. It was one of the things we discovered early in our marriage that we could do to entertain ourselves for free when we were experiencing financial difficulties. We loved each other and enjoyed an active sex life until my accident. The only positive result of being hurt at work was the huge settlement check we received. My children's education was secured, and I would have enough money left over for early retirement. The money was certainly not as important as my health, but as the days went by, it seemed to be coming back. Our life got back on track. I could keep up with work and my family. Everything fell back into place except sex with my wife. It had been over a year since we had made love. It must have been very difficult for Sally, but it wasn't easy for me either. Not only was I pressured by the fact that I was celibate, but guilt tormented me for not being able to give pleasure to my wife. Unfortunately, all the doctors told me that as long as I was on medication, my situation would not improve. Well, I said to hell with it and threw the pills in the trash that same day. If I have to live with the pain to renew what we once had, so be it. I didn't tell Sally about my decision because she wouldn't have agreed to it. Sally always told me that the most important thing was my health. Based on past experience, it would take some time for the chemicals to finally get out of my system. My company sent me to Toronto for a week of meetings on a new building my firm was designing. I left early Sunday morning and expected to be home the following Saturday afternoon. By Monday, I could feel my lower back muscles twitching. This was a good sign that the medication was wearing off. Despite the spasms, my appointments went well. I called home every evening to talk to my wife and kids as I usually did when I left on business. There was never anything new in those conversations, just the same talk about how school was going and how we all missed each other. The usual routine stuff, but I loved hearing all the details of my family's life. Thursday morning, I woke up with a steel rod between my legs. My back hurt, but I could care less about that. If it meant getting back in the saddle again, I would grit my teeth and endure the mild pain. My meetings ended that evening a day early. I was too excited to stay another minute, so I changed my flight reservations and had to be home the next morning around 11. All the kids should be in school, and Sally and I could spend the day together. On the way home, I thanked God for making me a whole person again. I took a cab from the airport. Traffic was light, and I got home around 11:30. When I walked into our house, well, you can all guess what might have happened, and you would be right. I experienced the greatest shock of my life when I quietly went upstairs to surprise Sally. Our reverend from our own church was vigorously comforting one of his parishioners in my bed. There could be no worse feeling than the one I felt at that moment. I wanted to rush in there and kill them both. They continued, and I couldn't take it anymore. I staggered out of the bedroom. The shock of seeing my wife, with whom I had lived with for 20 years, spreading her legs for another man nearly killed me. As for me, My first thought was my children and how they would live with this knowledge. That thought hit me so hard that I decided to quietly leave the house to have some time and think things through. I got a hotel room for the night. Two things immediately occurred to me. There was no more love for the woman I had married. She had killed that feeling in me today, and I had lost my faith in God. Just look what that insensitive bastard did to me. To hell with Sally, to hell with God, and to hell with his messenger. My mind was in turmoil, but I had to make a decision as to which direction to follow. By divorcing Sally, the children would find out about their mother's actions. Was that the best decision? No, their happiness meant more to me than anything in the world. I couldn't do that to them. I already knew what she had done, so nothing could be changed now. It was my burden to carry. No one would share my grief. Of course, Sally knew what she had done. Would she feel guilt? Would she confess her adultery and ask for forgiveness? The emotions within her that caused her to break her vows to me would probably not allow her to risk telling me. She knows full well how I feel about adultery. Believe me, the next day as I entered my home, I was overcome with a sense of loneliness. I made the decision to stay married to a woman whose side I could no longer bear. It had to be an acting performance worthy of an Academy Award. I didn't have to pretend to be tired when I got home. I hadn't slept a wink last night. I kissed Sally on the cheek and asked her if it would be a problem if we talked later. I went to my den and closed the door, staying there in solitude until dinner. At dinner, my mood was very depressed. I tried to pay attention to what the kids were saying and answer all their questions about Toronto. That night, I told Sally that while in Toronto, I found that I felt much better if I slept in a chair. My soft chair was downstairs in my den, so I spent the night there with no intention of ever sleeping in her bed again. The next morning was Sunday, and we all went to church as usual. I hadn't forgotten the other participant in the infidelity that had ruined my life, and I was going to make sure he knew it was over. The family sat in the front pew that day, though we usually sat somewhere in the middle. I stared intently at the preacher for a full hour as we listened to Tim preach. Sweat was rolling off his smug forehead. He didn't make eye contact with me the entire time we were there. I made sure we were the last ones to leave the chapel that day. I wanted to be the last person he shook hands with. When it was my turn in line, I squeezed his hand with an iron grip and continued to squeeze when he wrinkled in obvious pain. I leaned over and whispered, "Never come within sight distance of my family again, or I will nail you to the cross above the altar and set fire to this fucking house of God." The shock on his face told me he had heard my wise words. He knew I meant every word I said. The preacher packed up and left town before the week was over. I resumed my medication. My heart was already suffering, so there was no need to endure the pain in my back. Sally had tried several times to turn me on, but what I felt for her now did absolutely no good. I'm sure she noticed something had changed between us, but she probably just wrote it off to my guilt at not being able to do anything in bed. You might think it would be impossible to live in the same house with someone you no longer loved. I agree with you. It was difficult, but not impossible. If you do it long enough and think about hard enough, you can find an answer for any situation. Also, my medical issues have the advantage that you can use fatigue and pain to solve a lot of situations. I remembered all the special days such as anniversaries and birthdays, and always left a little code at the bottom of the card. Sally asked me one day after reading her birthday card what the letters meant. I told her it meant yours forever, Charlie. I'll tell you what it really means. You're a goddamn cheater. In all the years since Sally had cheated on me, I had never slept in the same room with her. I only returned to the church for my children's weddings, telling Sally that the wooden pews were too hard to sit on for long periods of time. I never told anyone about the secret I had kept inside me for the past 20 years. It was all done out of the only love that was left in me, and it was all for the sake of my children. Right now, I only have a few minutes to live. I can feel it. My family is now gathered around me. For the most part, I have led a good life. I have seen all of my children graduate from college and have families of their own. They are all grown and leading happy lives. That in itself was enough for me to go to my grave, a happy man. Once or twice over the years, the thought of getting a divorce crossed my mind. Sally cheating on me was a conscious act of betrayal that I have never forgiven and never will. For the first 20 years of our life together, I gave her all the love a man should give. For the last 20 years, I was just the man Sally had once married. My body lived in the same house we had worked so hard for, but my mind and heart were somewhere in the past. I never found out if Sally had cheated on me more than once. It really didn't matter, the results would have been the same either way. My children would have lost respect for one of us if the truth of what Sally had done was revealed to them. They would hate what their mother had done, but would probably want me to give her another chance. As much as I loved them, I wouldn't give her that chance. The pain and humiliation was too deep. Their wishes would have been denied, and my family would have come apart at the seams. I chose the path, right or wrong, to keep the family unit intact and strong. The mother of the children and I could be loved and treated with equal respect. Saying goodbye to my children for the last time is very hard and sad. I told each of them how much I love them and how proud I really am of them. I hugged and kissed them all goodbye and asked them to give me some time alone with their mother while there was still time. I still had a lot more to say to my so-called wife. There was less and less time left, and I was getting weaker by the minute. Over the past few weeks, I had made a decision about my little secret. Sally, please come closer, it's getting very difficult for me to speak. She moved her chair closer to the bed. Don't try to talk, dear. You need to rest. No, Sally, there is something very important to me that you need to know. For 20 years, you have been my wife, my lover, and my best friend. Oh, Charlie, you know we've been married for 40 years, not 20. That's true. And for the first 20 years, you were all that and more to me. But for the last 20, you were just another whore who cheated on her husband. I said hoarsely, did you know? Yeah. I came home early from that business trip to Toronto. I saw you. It's still hard for me to think about that day. Please, Charlie. I'm sorry, I don't want you to meet your maker like that. Oh God. I'm so sorry. To hell with your God, I said as loud as I could. Charlie, no. Please don't do this to me. Let me explain. I beg you, Charlie. I only gave in to temptation once. Please forgive me. I'm begging you. Sally, I've kept this secret locked inside all these years. I never spoke of it to spare the children. Now it's your secret to live with, and I hope you live to a very, very deep old age. Charlie, please, you have to forgive me before you die. Don't do this to me if I ever meant anything to you. Please, Charlie, please, she said quietly through her tears. Sally, one last thing. Now that I don't have to be nice to you, could you please get the fuck out of my sight? I moaned on my last breath.